Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Vayishlach, beginning in chapter 32 and verse 4 of Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis. As our portion opens, Yaakov has left his exile in the house of Lavan and is preparing for his first fateful meeting with his brother Esav in 20 years. Yaakov doesn't know if his brother's wrath has subsided, and thus this meeting could be dangerous. He embarks upon a three-pronged strategy consisting of sending a tribute, praying to Hashem for deliverance, and preparing for a defensive war if necessary. He formulates his entire plan, and at night he sends all of his camp on ahead across the ford of the Jabok river. After he transfers all his family, he winds up being alone, all alone at night on the other side of the stream. That's when verse 25 suddenly tells us that Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. With these excruciatingly sparing words, we encounter one of the most mysterious episodes in all of Torah. Who was this attacker, and what did he want from Yaakov? The sages teach that Yaakov's opponent was no ordinary man, but actually Esav's heavenly angel. Every nation has its celestial guardian, as it were, and this was the spiritual entity representing Esav, the one that oversees the nation of Edom, in human form, attacking Yaakov as a spiritual prelude to his meeting with Esav himself on the material plane. But what was the purpose of this struggle? And why was it necessary for Yaakov to experience a meeting with Esav's ministering angel before meeting Esav himself? So open up your heart. First of all, crossing the river Jabok signaled a transition, echoing Yaakov's spiritual crossing from a life of preparation to one of purpose and mission. This Torah portion marks Yaakov's transformation from being his mother's son into the patriarch of the nation of Israel. And the deepest truth is that in order to prepare Yaakov for his task of working towards the ultimate rectification of the whole world, it was necessary for him to confront and overcome the negative forces associated with Esav and symbolized by this angel. This struggle was a test of Yaakov's spiritual strength and resilience, and his victory signifies the triumph of the soul over the material, and the refinement and containment of Esav's negative forces. Midrash Rabbah notes that the angel's attack came at night, signaling exile and confusion and spiritual challenges. Yaakov's perseverance through that night enabled him to bequeath to his descendants the strength that they would need to endure through the darkness of the many long nights of exile that they would face until the dawn of redemption. And his victory foreshadows the ultimate triumph of good over evil in the Messianic era. But what was Yaakov doing alone that night, all by himself on one side of the Jabok, with his family on the other side? According to a well-known teaching of our sages cited by Rashi, Yaakov was alone because after he had brought his family to the other side of the river, he himself crossed back again alone, returning to receive, quote, small jars that he had forgotten. Now, ostensibly, this demonstrates his care for all that God entrusted to him, even seemingly insignificant possessions. On a deeper level, these small, forgotten containers symbolize the concept of spiritual sparks, elements of holiness that are hidden in this world, in every aspect of creation and in every situation, even in mundane objects. Yaakov returned as part of his greater mission to redeem these sparks, in keeping with what was to become the greater mission of the nation of Israel, namely, the assignment of elevating the physical world. But if you open up your heart in the deepest way, it gets better. According to a very great secret that resounds so beautifully with this month of Kislev. Back in chapter 8 of the Torah portion of Noach, we learned that after the flood, Noah sends out a dove to see if the waters of the flood were subsiding from the earth. The second time he sent the dove, it returned with an olive branch in its mouth. There's a tradition, writes the great Hasidic master known as the Imre Noam, tradition that Noah made a small amount of pure olive oil from those olives on the branch. He gave over this oil to his firstborn son Shem. Shem, also known as Melchizedek, the priest to the Most High God, he sealed this little jar of oil and he gave it to Abraham as a gift. Avraham in turn handed it over to Yitzchak, who passed it down to Yaakov. When we learn here in our portion of Vayishlach that Jacob forgot some small jars on the other side of the Jabok River and returned to retrieve them, one of these jars was the oil from Noah's ark. Yaakov prophetically and purposely hid this oil at the site of what would later become the Holy Temple, thus spiritually laying the foundations for the miracle of Hanukkah over 1,600 years before it happened. Later in history, at the time of Hanukkah, when the Hasmonaim priests defeated the Greek invaders who defiled the temple, this was the one pure container of olive oil that was found that still bore the high priest's seal of purity, which provided the oil for the Hanukkah miracle of the oil that was kindled in the temple menorah that lasted for 8 days. And thus the miracle of the oil of Hanukkah originated with Noach's dove and was foreseen by Yaakov. But open up your heart deeper still. In verse 26 we read, "When he perceived that he could not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So Jacob's hip socket was dislocated when he wrestled with him." So the angel sought to weaken Yaakov, but Yaakov resisted the negative force and he triumphed. In their struggle, the angel sees that he cannot overpower Yaakov, and so he injures him in his thigh, causing him to limp. Yet despite his injury, Yaakov emerges victorious. So we find that as a direct result of the angel wounding Yaakov's thigh, Torah here introduces a unique divine prohibition against eating the gid hanasheh of a kosher animal. Verse 33 of chapter 32 reads, "Therefore the children of Israel are not to eat the displaced sinew on the hip socket to this day, because he struck Jacob's hip socket on the displaced sinew." Sometimes translated as the sciatic nerve or the displaced sinew, the gid hanasheh anatomically is located in the hindquarters, extending from the hip area down the leg. This includes both the sciatic nerve and its surrounding tendons. Because of this, in the preparation of kosher meat, the hindquarters of kosher animals such as cows, sheep, and goats are not generally processed at all for kosher consumption. Instead, kosher meat is typically sourced from the front part of the animal, which does not contain the gid hanasheh. This is all really quite puzzling. It's quite interesting, but it's quite puzzling. Why should Yaakov's injury be remembered in a mitzvah relating to the kosher dietary law, indeed a divine commandment binding on all future generations of Israel? Why are we instructed to commemorate Yaakov's struggle with the angel through a prohibition relating to food? What does Yaakov's injury have to do with eating? And what is analogous between Yaakov's sciatic nerve and that of the meat that we consume? So open up your heart even deeper. The process of eating food is a very deep thing. It's not just about eating. All food has a spiritual essence, and the act of eating is about spiritual intake and the integration of that essence becoming incorporated within ourselves. Eating something makes it a part of the eater, and as everybody knows, you are what you eat, or more accurately, what you eat becomes you. So really the prohibition against eating this gid hanasheh is about internalizing the lesson of Yaakov's struggle and truly making it a part of us and refusing to internalize what Esav's angel represents, namely the spiritual toxins of opposition and negativity. In this life, we are constantly facing an ongoing struggle with adversarial forces, both physical and spiritual. Yaakov's injury in the thigh, close to the reproductive area, also represents the vulnerability of future generations, especially during times of exile. But the prohibition against eating this sciatic nerve connects Yaakov's spirit to those future generations as well, internalizing the legacy of Yaakov's own powers of endurance and resilience, and strengthening the faith needed to confront these ongoing struggles. Avoiding the gid hanasheh symbolizes a desire to maintain spiritual integrity despite challenges, while serving as a reminder that despite being wounded by adversaries, like Yaakov, we can ultimately prevail and elevate physical existence toward divine purpose. And the thigh is crucial for mobility. It's about movement, and so it represents the ability to move forward in life's journey. The angel's attack on Yaakov's thigh symbolizes an attempt to stop his progress, physically and spiritually. Avoiding the gid hanasheh reinforces the idea that we have to be vigilant against anything that hinders spiritual progress. In this way, this divine commandment becomes a call to action, to keep moving forward even when wounded, and to be wary of the perpetual conflict between the forces of holiness and unholiness that can manifest in our lives as well. But now open up your heart in the very deepest way. At that transformative nighttime struggle at the Jabok River, the name Yisrael was bestowed upon Jacob by the angel. The name Yaakov, his original name, from the Hebrew Akev, meaning heel, reflects his origin as one who is confronted by challenges and must navigate life with perseverance. When the angel renames him Yisrael, It signifies his triumph and spiritual ascent. The new name is connected to the word sar, meaning a prince, as one who has contended with divine and human forces and prevailed. And it's also made up of the words yashar el, straight to God. So this emphasizes Yaakov's elevated status after the struggle with the angel, which was a status that wasn't merely for himself, but it was a prototype for the nation of Israel. Yet the wonder of it is that even after this new name is bestowed, we find that Torah and later prophetic texts continue to use both names interchangeably, sometimes even using both names within one verse. So how do we understand this duality? And the question is even more compelling when we reflect on Abraham's earlier name change. Our sages teach that once Hashem changed Avram's name to Avraham, he is never again to be referred to as Avram. His name was permanently altered to reflect his new mission. Yet after the angel of God changes Yaakov's name to Yisrael, God himself continues to call him both Yaakov and Yisrael interchangeably. Why this difference between Yaakov's name change and the earlier name change of Avraham? So here's the thing. When God changed Avram's name to Avraham back in chapter 17 of our book of Genesis, that signified a complete transformation in his spiritual status and mission. His original name, Avram, literally translates as exalted father. Hashem altered this name by adding the letter He, changing the name to Avraham, alluding to the concept of a father of a multitude of nations. This reflects his future role as the progenitor of a multitude of nations. Recognizing and respecting Avraham's new identity and divine mission is crucial because he became a completely different person. His new identity necessitates use of the new name exclusively. God's intention in that renaming was that the name Avraham completely cancels out Avram. Our sages stress that this is so important, avoiding the use of his former name, because referring to him as Avram would negate this fundamental shift in his universal mission, which is why the Torah prohibits the use of his former name. So the change to Avraham represents a one-directional, irreversible progression, and the name Avraham reflects the culmination of a journey from being an individual patriarch to becoming the archetype of faith and monotheism for all humanity. On the other hand, when Yaakov's name was changed to Yisrael by the angel of God, it introduced another level of identity, a more complex aspect of his identity and destiny, which was now earned and well-deserved. The name Yisrael, meaning he who struggles with God, encapsulated Yaakov's spiritual growth and struggles and triumph in his encounter with the angel. But the continued use by God himself of both names, Yaakov and Yisrael, underscores the complexity of Yaakov's character and mission, encompassing both his earthly struggles and his divine calling. And unlike Avraham, Yaakov continues to embody both aspects of his name. His name change was not a substitution, but an addition, another layer of identity, not supplanting the first as it was with Avraham. The deepest truth is that Yaakov's name was not completely replaced, because along the long road to redemption in the Jewish people's ongoing spiritual journey, both aspects of his identity are needed. The name Yaakov symbolizes the earthly, constrained identity, engaged in effort and struggle. The name Yisrael represents a higher, transcendent identity, connected to divine purpose and bespeaking a higher level of prophetic revelation. Yaakov corresponds to a lower spiritual state where divine light is concealed, while Yisrael reflects a higher state of expanded consciousness where divine light is revealed. But both are necessary for the process of tikkun olam, rectifying the world, and both contribute to the collective identity of his descendants, reflecting the nature of the entire nation's mission. So while Abraham's transformation was final and absolute, Yaakov's mission as the forefather of Israel requires him to maintain a dual role. His descendants must navigate the tension between their material struggles as Yaakov and their spiritual aspirations as Yisrael. These states define human existence, a dynamic interchange of effort and grace, struggle and victory. Thus, Torah intentionally alternates between Yaakov and Yisrael to demonstrate that both identities are essential and coexist within him and his descendants. The labor of Yaakov in refining the physical world and the spiritual illumination, the prophetic fulfillment of Yisrael. In moments of hardship and perseverance, we're like Yaakov. In moments of spiritual clarity and fulfillment, we are like Yisrael. Recognizing this duality enables the integration of both aspects into a unified national identity. Yaakov is the struggler and Yisrael is the victor. And Torah's continued use of both names illustrates the interplay between the earthly and the divine, the personal and the collective, and the material and the spiritual dimensions of human existence. Thus, the dual names of Yaakov and Yisrael encapsulate Israel's national journey, and they also transcend and express the human struggle from subjugation to redemption, from constricted to expanded consciousness. The coexistence of these names serves as a reminder that holiness is achieved not by escaping the physical world, but by sanctifying it, and that even in our highest spiritual states of Yisrael, the humility and perseverance of Yaakov remain essential for a true life of serving God in this world.